All right, welcome back, grade 10s. We're going to continue to do some multiple choice, prep, recovery, skill development, fill in the blank. And then once I hit the wall with that, I'll give you the final half of what remains in the class to do some more research. And then we'll call it a day here in social studies land. So we do have a multiple choice test as early as next. Does she need that? Maybe you could go deliver it to her?
I took it from her and then she got it back and left it on my desk.
Yeah, maybe deliver it to her then. So we have a multiple choice test as early as next Thursday, and we'll have a multiple choice part on the final exam. So you'll see some more multiple choice with some kind of skin in the game in terms of exams, and I want to make sure we go over some more skills as well. So looking at a field test, a 10-1 field test that I have, you can see that the first question again is a what we call discrete question. There's no source, and it is simple recall. So if you know the term culture, you get it. If you don't, you don't. Same thing with the second question. It's another discrete question. There's nothing that you can do to dissect what's on the page here. It's more of a recall question. So there will be some questions like that you definitely need to prep for by knowing the key terms. But we also may have some questions that are called source-based questions. So for example, we have 4 quotes, and they are accredited to individuals that you may or may not recognize, and having a background information about these 4 individuals isn't necessary to get the question right. In order to get the question right, we need to read the question stem first. The 2 quotes that are least alike with respect to globalization. So now we're going to go through these 4 quotes and put them on some kind of spectrum, some kind of continuum, to try to compare and contrast them. Globalization represents the world without walls. Bill Clinton. Tony Blair. Globalization is inevitable and irresistible. So just comparing Clinton and Blair, are they disagreeing with each other? One guy, Bill Clinton, says it's the world without walls, and the other guy, former Prime Minister of England, United Kingdom, says globalization is inevitable and irresistible. I'm not sure Bill disagrees with that. So we'll keep looking and see what President George W. Bush says. Globalization is the ties of trade and trust. And then the last quote says, globalization allows companies to hold a gun to government's head. So some of them have value statements attached to them. You know, George W. Bush, he's associating globalization with trust. There's a value statement there. And the quote at the end also has a value statement, and it's showing the lack of trust. So being that the one at the end shows a lack of trust, the idea that companies hold a gun to government's head, and therefore it's a violation of trust, you could make the argument that the 2 Georges are those who are least alike. So, having came into the test question with maybe no background information about any of these 4 individuals, then you just have to look at, well, what is it that they're saying, and find the 2 that are furthest apart. And these 2 seem to agree with each other, but it's these 2 that actually have a value statement. This one's saying, hey, globalization, it's built on trust. This one is, globalization, it's built on, violence and exploitation. It's a great quote that you could be adding to your notes here too, right? That globalization allows companies to hold a gun to government's head. That seems to reflect some of the sentiment around anti-globalization because of the manipulation that transnationals do of governments. All right, so moving on. We have another quote. So now we're getting into questions that are pretty typical in the sense that there's a relative short reading that we have to do, and then we answer some questions. But even though it's a relative short reading, I don't want to do this reading 3-4 times, but I want to make sure I know why I'm reading it. So there's 2 questions attached to it. I might take a quick peek at the questions before I read the source. The author of this passage states that the innovation of communications technology has led to something. The author of the passage agrees that the greatest negative effect of technological change has been. So when I'm reading through this, I'm trying to find some kind of negative effect. And it almost seems like this question gave away the answer to this one. So the author of this passage suggests or states that the innovation of communications technology has led to. So we're going to have to look for that idea in context now. So our world is a rapidly changing place. Humans have seen more technological change, innovation, and development in the last 150 years than they have seen in the history of mankind. Radio, television, telephone, automobiles, modern transportation, computer technology, and the internet have connected the world in more ways than imaginable. So far, we don't know if this individual thinks it's positive or negative. They haven't said that it's good or bad. It certainly hasn't said it decreases our connectedness. So we'll have to keep looking. Paradoxically, although this interconnectedness enables sharing of local cultures across the world, it also results in universalization of culture into one worldwide culture of modern convenience, and thus the loss of local culture. So the loss of local culture could be seen as a negative effect. So at least we're seeing some negative effect here. Paradoxically, although this interconnectedness enables sharing of local cultures, sharing of local cultures could be seen as a positive effect. Being that I'm seeing the positive and the negative, I'm going to end up going with D. Then the author of the passage agrees the greatest negative effect of technology has been, they definitely talk about homogenization as one of the negative effects. Increased interconnectedness is shown as a positive up here, and understanding of other cultures wouldn't be a negative thing. So homogenization is definitely the greatest negative effect. So, and then we have another reading comp. So often you'll have questions that are reading comprehension. And again, it's important to first look at, well, why am I reading it? In this passage, the author states that a consequence of the corporate concentration of media is what? So I'm going to have to read through this and say, okay, what are they saying about corporate control over the media? Is it the best method of ownership? Does it lead to uniformity in outlook? Does it provide fair, open, and flexible reporting? Does it reflect a variety of society's values? Well, having already studied concentrationship of ownership of media, I very doubt that the person is going to be saying this or this. And I'm probably guessing that it's going to say something like this. That when we studied the media and the concentration of ownership of the media, we talked about how it leads to a convergence. So I'm suspecting it's going to be B. But I'm not going to just say B. I'm going to go up and I'm going to read through it and make sure that that's what this Ben guy is saying. The threat does not lie in the commercial operation of the mass media. It is the best method there is, and with all of its faults, it is not inherently bad. But narrow control or corporations is inherently bad. In the end, no small group, certainly no group with as much uniformity of outlook, that's too easy. Much uniformity of outlook and as concentrated in power as the current media corporations can be sufficiently open and flexible to reflect the full richness of variety of society's values and needs. So the problem that they're seeing is it lacks this. And again, the question might be a little too easy because it pulled that right out of it. That I would hope that if we had this question on a test, you would get it right. So here's another source, a continuum. Based on the continuum, the best understanding of hybridization is. So again, we know what hybridization is from studying the course, but we should be able to go back and use the knowledge in this source to further outline it. Sometimes we'll connect vocabulary in sources that look like this. Basically, it's four things have what in common. So what is the cultural relationship that is being described in the web? So tolerance and diversity, many ethnic groups in Canada's cultural policy, what do they all have in common? Well, it's not, these are all positive things, so it's not going to be marginalized. When you tolerate differences, you're not marginalizing, and you're certainly not homogenizing. What we're allowing for is a plurality, a multiplicity. So to get number 11 right, it just comes down to language and vocab. Collective group that has little or no political power is considered to be marginalized. These are straight recall, like definition words. So, a few more things to look forward to. We've seen cartoons like this one. We've seen lots of little quotes. So as we get ready for the final exam, that's what, 3 weeks away kind of thing, we need to be going back over the beginning of the course and saying, how am I going to be tested on that? How am I going to be tested on it in multiple choice? And become more familiar with that. Chief Poundmaker's main concern was that the Canadian government was. So maybe we don't know Chief Poundmaker that well, but there's a quote here for us. So Chief Poundmaker's main concern was that the government was doing something. This is our land. It isn't just a piece to be cut off and given in little pieces back to us. It's ours, and we'll take what we want. So his main concern was the Canadian government was trying to move the First Nations people onto reserve land. Sure sounds like it. You know, this is our land and you're giving us a little piece back. Attempting to control resources that were on traditional Aboriginal land. It's talking about giving back little pieces of land. So that pulls me more to A than B. Ignoring serious health issues. There's no reference to health up here. Preparing for a serious confrontation with the Métis people of Western Canada. There's no reference to Métis. There's reference to Cree people, but not Métis people up here. So the only thing that pulls me to this is the idea that, you know, this was all our land, and now you're trying to give us back a little bit, little pieces, and that's what one could see. If you look at a map, that's what the whole idea of reserves is. So there's some deductive reasoning needed to break down these multiple choice questions. So a nice little cartoon. You got the Statue of Liberty has stepped on what looks like perhaps a stereotypical Mexican person. On one side, that's source 1. Source 2, we have some information about some riots in France in 2005. Taken together, the sources relate best to the concept of what is happening here. Is it cultural pluralism, marginalization, assimilation, imperialism? And again, it's just application of language. So, just thought we could take a little bit of time to look forward, to break up your review that you're doing today. Here's one related to the topics that you're searching up today. So you have President Obama and you have former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. President Obama is standing on top of this big pile of US coal, and he says, we can see eye to eye on the benefits of clean energy, right, Prime Minister? Yes, Mr. President, we can. So while the US President was putting pressure on Canada to clean up the Alberta oil sands, they were using US coal, which is often much, much dirtier use of energy. So that's the irony here that's being shown through this juxtaposition. The above source is criticizing the American government based upon America's use of Alberta oil sands as an alternative Middle East producers. I mean, there's Alberta oil sands here, so there's a pull to that. I don't see any connection to the Middle East. America's continual criticism of the government, Canadian government, for the huge amount of coal that the oil sands gives to the USA. Yes, we do see this, but this is US coal. They're not getting it from us. America's push for the development of clean energy and criticism of the oil sands development while they, USA, still burn dirty coal. Absolutely, that's what's happening here. So this is a good question that's taking the content that you're researching today and saying, do you get something related to it? This is a really good question. Certainly like it. All right, so there's a little bit more multiple choice review, and we'll keep doing a little bit each day leading up to, well, maybe not each day, but we'll keep doing a little bit here and then leading up to the next exams. So you have a half an hour left. do some research so that your essays can be sound and purposeful.